Spooky, scary, spooky, scary, spooky, scary, spooky, scary. It's October time! Hey, what's up you guys, the Curious Owl here, and I am just so excited that today, the day I'm filming, is October 1st. I don't know what it is, but October is always like a really fun month for everybody. It's just, you know, it's fall, it's cooler, it's Halloween time, and all of us former goth kids and kinda still goth kids on the lowdown get to actually be ourselves and then disdain everyone who decides to dress up as goth that used to make fun of us. Not bitter or anything. But anyway, I'm going to be going over the small amount of books I actually finished in September. So if you guys have been following me for the last couple weeks or so, about a month, I have not had the best mental health experience the last month and a half, and September I really struggled. I ended up having a lot of DNFs because, not so much for the mental health reasons, but to be completely honest, I had no enjoyment in a lot of the books that I was reading. A lot of the arcs that I was trying to get through I wasn't finding to be very good. One was a very good exception, and I ended up actually getting the finished physical copy of the said arc, and I did have two other books I did end up finishing that I really enjoyed, but for the most part the month was kind of disappointing with as many DNFs as I had. Now, because I did DNF so many of these books, I'm not going to really go into any of the specifics because for the most part, the reasons why I didn't like these books and I didn't finish them is for the same reason. By the time I hit about 10% of the book or so far into the book, I lost interest because either the story wasn't that captivating or just for some reason it didn't catch the interest that I thought it would when I had asked for it on NetGalley, and that's kind of the case sometimes. But without further ado, let me get into everything that I tried to read and some of the things I actually did read this month. So my stats for this month were I read a total of 1,613 pages. I actually completed 3 books over the course of the month, but I had tried to read over the course of the month 10 books. I also listened to 9 hours and 6 minutes worth of audiobooks. One of the books I completed this month was a physical book, one was an ebook, and one was an audiobook. None of the books that I completed this month were on my personal shelf. 2 of the books that I read this month and completed were borrowed, either from Robert or from my local library, and one of the books that I completed this month was an e-arc. So because the first 6 books of this month were arcs I didn't like, I'm just going to tell you which ones I ended up DNFing, and I'm not going to go into any specifics with them because I don't really have any reason to, considering I didn't even care for these books anyway. So that was In the Shadow of Spindrift House by Mira Grant, Wherever She Goes by Kelly Armstrong, Beau and Bet by Catherine Burla, An American Duchess by Carolyn Fife, Aftershock by Marco Cluse, and David Mogo God Hunter by Sugi Davies Okungboa. I think that's how you pronounce his last name. But yeah, so pretty much the whole generic idea of these being DNF'd was I lost interest in them about 10% of the way in. If a book's not going to keep me interested, why am I going to continue to try to read it? However, with that said, the first book I actually completed this month that was an e-arc was Wilder Girls by Rory Power. I loved it so much that I actually ended up getting a physical copy of it. But I will say, after having sit on it now for a few days, about a week since I finished the book, there are some things that I kind of wish would have been different, more than I had originally thought about when I finished the book at first. So to give you guys a little bit of an idea of what Wilder Girls is about, essentially if you want to think of the Maze Runner with the amount of omnicity and complete isolation that there is in the Maze Runner, with the fact that you have a bunch of kids on an island somewhere or just in some place, Wilder Girls is about a school of girls that is placed off the coast of Maine on a random island, and when all of these girls get to this school, there develops this really odd sickness, and they call it the tox. The tox essentially starts at the top with all of the adults, where a lot of the adults, teachers, and people like that end up getting sick, and then all of the actual students start getting sick as well, and it just starts killing them one by one by one. The tox, for those that it doesn't kill, ends up giving them very strange mutations, and it seems to be getting worse as time goes on, especially since there is a lack of food that is provided for the girls. The story really centers around 2 girls who are essentially best friends, Hetty and Byatt. I think that the story focuses more on Hetty's perspective, but Byatt's perspective is played into the story and is a very valid, very important aspect to the story. Hetty essentially is the daughter of a Navy man, and she went to this boarding school, and she and Byatt are best friends. But Byatt ends up going through what's called a flare-up, where the tox essentially starts to ravage her body, and Byatt is taken off somewhere that Hetty doesn't know. Hetty starts to think that there's something seriously wrong with the fact that Byatt is being shipped off somewhere that she doesn't know, and so she teams up with one of their other friends, Reese, in order to try to find out what exactly has happened to Byatt. But that it does include breaking quarantine, which is a really, really bad thing because of the fact that these girls are under a quarantine for this tox. This story, I think, is really, really different. It is so very different from a lot of things I think I have seen in terms of thrillers because it plays into the omnisciency about the tox. There's a lot that goes into, I think, thrillers when it comes to establishing an atmosphere within a story, because a lot of times thrillers, if they're especially dealing with kind of more otherworldly, maybe more paranormal things, they focus on the paranormal aspect. But here we have something where the omniscience comes from the tox itself, the sickness that has ravaged all of these girls, and you never know what it is going to do to any of them. You never know when it is going to spring up and kill one of the girls, or when it is going to essentially mutate one of them. One of the things I want to mention right off the bat, though, before I go further into this, is that there are many things about this book that are incredibly, incredibly dark. There are so many trigger warnings that I can place for this, but what I'm going to do instead is I'm actually going to link the author's website for this book, because she created an entire list of trigger warnings for this book because she knew that there was a lot of content within it that was going to possibly be harmful for a bunch of different people. So if you want to know what those trigger warnings are before going into this novel, I would suggest looking at that page that she has on her website, because I found it incredibly amazing that she even decided to make something like that, because typically we don't get a lot of trigger warnings for content that is going to be involved with the book. And personally, I like them because I like to know kind of what I might be getting into, but I'm also not a person that is very much affected by a lot of the things that would be considered triggering for a lot of people, but I do recognize that people understand and like the idea of trigger warnings. So if you would like to know more about that, there's a link in the description for you. One of the things, though, I feel like with this book that is something I kind of step back and I'm kind of questioning is I feel like a lot of the story was incomplete. I feel like a lot of the story by itself was really kind of minuscule compared to what I think could have been the potential. I rated this book a 4 out of 5 stars, and I stand by that. I really enjoyed this book, but one of the things I remember thinking of when I first had finished it was that there wasn't really a lot in terms of what the tox exactly was and how it started, and there was a lot of unanswered questions in regards to it. The ending of the novel almost makes it seem like there is the possibility for there to be maybe a sequel, but it's very open-ended in the aspect that there's a lot of unanswered questions, and it is possible that there might be some smaller story or some other encompassing novel that is going to answer more questions in the future. But it also can lead to the idea that there is the possibility that no one in this world even knows anything about what is going on. So I think that this story is kind of left up to the reader to make a decision of whether or not they would like to know more about the tox. Like, I wonder if this is part of the point of what Rory has done, is that there are sometimes things in the world that happen that we can't always explain because we might not be as technologically advanced to be able to understand it, or we may not have the actual knowledge of what is happening. So it's kind of one of those things where you have to decide whether or not you like the idea of things being a little more open-ended. Now, personally, for me, I kind of wish I knew a little more about what happened with the tox, but considering the idea that it's possible it was intended to be more of an open-ended story, I'm a little more okay with that being more open-ended. The one thing too I will say is that this story does have at least 2 bi, maybe gay main characters. It's never really quite established whether they're gay or they're bi, but that representation is in there. I greatly appreciated it. I really enjoyed it. And the one thing though I will say about it is I feel like the romantic aspect that plays into this story is kind of unnecessary. I felt like the story would have been just fine if there was no romantic involvement of any kind, because I think the story should have been more focused on what the hell is going on this island with this tox. The second book I completed this month was A Dance with Dragons by George R.R. Martin. I have got myself finally caught up with the Song of Ice and Fire series by George R.R. Martin to this point. This is the last main book in the series that he has come out with. The sixth book, Winds of Winter, is supposed to come out sometime next spring, I believe, and I really hope it does, because this book was really, really amazing. I still think though that A Storm of Swords is my #1 favorite of the series. This one just had so much going on with it, and one thing I didn't care about it was that I felt like there was a lot of unnecessary nameage within the story. One of the things that I have noticed about George R.R. Martin is that he will tend to rename characters for the purposes of what is going on with them currently, and that is heavily done in this book. There are so many characters that are used in this book that go through very different things. They go through a lot of different events over the course of what seems to be a very short amount of time. And within all of that, especially for one particular character that I'm not going to say, he probably has, I think, 3 or 4 different name changes in this story because of all of the different events that he goes through. And I personally didn't like that, because I felt like it made the story a little more confusing going into each individual chapter, because I thought we were dealing with all new characters, and then you get to be about halfway through the first page and you're like, oh, wait a minute. This is the same character as I've been reading. They just changed the name again because of something that's going to happen in the story. But regardless, I really do love this series. I am so glad I actually finally started really getting into the series. And I'm really excited to say that I also have Fire and Blood, which he released in November following the Targaryen line about 300 years before the Song of Ice and Fire series. And I also have the short story collection of The Night of the Seven Kingdoms, which follows essentially the tale of 2 people 90 years before the Song of Ice and Fire series. And the last book I completed this month was Bird Box by Josh Malerman. I ended up picking this as my audiobook for the month at the very end of the month, essentially, within the last full week of September, because I was reading technically the audiobook for A Dance with Dragons. I was more so listening to the audiobook to be able to get through the physical book, because I like the idea of listening to the audiobooks as you read the Song of Ice and Fire series, because it gets you more involved in the story. But my actual audiobook for the month was Bird Box, and I was surprised by how much I really liked this book. The only thing I knew about Bird Box was about as much as what the trailers for the Netflix movie had portrayed, which was that something in the world is deadly and it is killing people, and you cannot see it, otherwise you are basically going to go crazy and die. And that is pretty much the whole plot of the story, is you are following a main character named Mallory. You're following her in kind of 2 timelines, where there's a before where you find out she is pregnant at the beginning of this entire world essentially falling apart and people dying left and right. She finds out she's pregnant, and the story leads up to about when she has her baby. And then there's the second timeline that plays into 4 years after her child is born, and her journeying through this river in hopes of finding some kind of solace area that she knows of that she's trying to use to protect her children. Because she not only has her child, but she has another child where it is not quite determined at the beginning whether it is her child as well or if it was somebody else's child. And you find out more about that whole scenario as you read the book. And I really liked it. The 2 timelines kind of go synonymous with each other, where it's almost as if you have 1 chapter in the past and 1 chapter more in the present. And I really like that structure, because honestly, I never used to. But for this story, it worked, because many of the things that would be coming up in the more present chapters of the story would lead to points that would go chronologically within the story of the past. The one thing I will say about this story is, for some reason, I was just really confused partway through, because there were, especially at the end, some points where I didn't quite understand what was happening. I felt like there was just a lot of points at the end of the story that I was very confused on. And the ending itself, honestly, did not go the way I expected, and I feel like I was kind of let down in a way by the ending. I can't even really tell you what it was because obviously it would spoil the story, but I don't even quite remember what happened at the end of the story because everything was so jumbled up that I couldn't keep track of what was happening. But regardless, I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars, and I really enjoyed it. I am looking forward to reading the second book, which is Mallory, and I'm interested to see how that one's going to go because since I don't really remember what happened in Bird Box, I'm probably going to be caught off guard right away with what exactly has happened, and I'm just interested to see what else there is to tell of the story, because it seems like if there's a second book, there's definitely more to tell, and I wonder if we're ever going to find out what is killing everybody. And then the last book I tried to finish this month, but I ended up DNFing, was another E-ARC, and that was The Gamer's Guide to Getting the Girl by Christine Scarrow, I think. And again, with the rest of the E-ARCs I DNF'd this month, I just didn't enjoy it. This one I actually got a lot farther into before I DNF'd it. I was probably about 35% of the way through it. But my biggest gripe with this one, and actually was the reason I DNF'd it, was a little too gimmicky for my liking. And I feel like that there was way too many references to popular culture video games, as this was a story dealing with a 15-year-old kid who was obsessed with video games, basically trapped in a mall with his best friend and a girl he's just met that he's ultimately fallen in love with, when there is a huge storm going on outside, and he has to essentially try to help keep them and everyone else in this mall that's trapped there safe and sound. And I felt like it was kind of gimmicky. There were a lot of references to a lot of video games that I was okay with at first, but it got to a point where it was a little much, and I just found everything to be really unrealistic. I couldn't enjoy it for what it was, unfortunately. I know that there's some people who would definitely love this story for its quirkiness and its kind of far outlandishness about it. I didn't though. So anyway, those are all the books I ended up either not liking and DNFing or finishing this month. It was a pretty disappointing month, like I said, considering I had so many DNFs. But the stories I did end up finishing this month, I really did enjoy. But anyway, if you guys would like to share with me what you read in September and how you enjoyed them, let me know down in the comments below. If you guys did enjoy this video, please do give it a big thumbs up. And if you're not already and you'd like to be, hit the button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock. And I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye guys!